All right, number 3, we have 1 over sine minus sine equals cotangent cosine. I'm going to work the left side. No real reason why I chose the left. I'm just chose it. 50-50 chance, really. There's stuff you could do to both sides. So let's just work the left this first time through this. So 1 over sine minus sine. I've got basically a fraction minus, and really sine's a fraction, is sine over 1. So basically, I'm going to add them together. I'm going to get a common denominator. So that's going to be 1 over sine minus, if I multiply by sine over sine, I get sine squared over sine. And then that's going to be 1 minus sine squared over the common denominator sine. 1 minus sine squared is cosine squared. Again, if you don't know your trig identities, you can't do this. And so now I've got cosine squared over sine. So and now the nice thing is you got to remember, you know the answer. Like a lot of kids ask me in 5-1, well, how do I know when it's simplified? Well, you don't have to worry about it here because you know you have to get to cotangent cosine. And so hopefully you can see, well, hey, I got a cosine squared on top. That's a cosine times a cosine. So if I write cosine theta times cosine theta, and I have cosine theta over sine theta times cosine theta on top, you can see that you have cosine over sine is cotangent, and then there's the cosine, and that's what I wanted to end up with right there. So I'm going to write cotangent theta, cosine theta equals cotangent theta, cosine theta. So now I wonder if I could have done this differently. Could I have worked the right side first? Well, let's find out. Let's work the right side first and see if we can do it. So on the right side, the cotangent times cosine, the only thing I can think to do is say I'm going to make that cosine over sine in place of cotangent times the cosine of theta. And now I look at what I'm trying to get over here. I'm trying to get 1 over sine minus the sine. So I'm kind of working backwards because we had that up here. We had the cosine over sine times cosine. And so sometimes that helps if you already had that, and it make it easier. But if I was just doing this from scratch, I would look at this and be really confused as to what I might do next. All right, so what do you do? Because I know how you feel as you're starting to learn to do this. You say, well, I have no idea what to do next. So let's say you're looking at this and you say, I have no idea what to do. Well, again, at the bottom it says try something. So when you look at this, you say, well, I already went from cotangent to cosine over sine. I'm looking at this and it's got to end up being something minus something. And how am I going to do that out of this? And so you just say, no, there's no way, I can't do it. But wait a second. I have a cosine times a cosine. And you know that equals what? You know that equals cosine squared over sine theta. And so now, how is something going to be a subtraction? Because cosine squared equals 1 minus sine squared. And now I can separate it, 1 over sine minus sine squared over sine, which ends up being 1 over sine minus sine. And that equals 1 over sine minus sine. So you could do it doing the right side. I definitely think the left side was easier, but just again, showing you that it can be done. And it also shows you, again, tricks and things that you can try to do. You've got to just try things. You got to say, and you got to know getting a trig function squared is sometimes very valuable. So number 4, we have sine over cosecant. I'm going to work the left side, obviously. Sine of theta over 1 over the sine of theta plus cosine of theta over 1 over the cosine of theta, because secant equals 1 over the cosine of theta, and cosecant is 1 over the sine of theta. So I just replace those reciprocal identities. This becomes sine squared when you divide by a fraction, you multiply by the reciprocal, so it becomes sine times sine. This becomes cosine times cosine, so it's cosine squared. And we know that equals 1, so 1 equals 1. I do want to show you that it is possible to do this in shorter steps. And if I think I showed you this a little earlier on the maybe first example, but this right here is basically sine times 1 over cosecant. And we know 1 over cosecant equals sine, so you could literally just go say this is equal to sine squared theta, and this is cosine squared theta, and then that is 1 equals 1. So you could just do it in those two steps, and I would give you credit for that. That's fine, because I recognize, and most people are going to recognize, that you got 1 over cosecant, which is sine. So that's going to be sine times sine. So that's another way to do it. Either way is fine, whatever you like.